Hello everybody, my name is Day. Welcome back to my channel. We are here today to do something a little bit different than I'm used to. April is National Poetry Month, and poetry is something that I have never really gotten into. For this month, Shay and I are not doing a challenge, but we're doing a study. We wanted to dive into poetry and also write some of our own. For myself personally, because I don't know much about poetry as a whole, I need to learn the basics of poetry. I also have a character in my fantasy novel that is a closet poet, and it's part of his magic. However, he's not helped by his author not knowing anything about poetry. So I'm trying to correct that. I think it'll be a twofold benefit for myself in that I will be able to write poetry for myself, and also I will be able to write poetry for this character who is a poet. So I'm very excited. My overall goal is to learn the fundamentals of poetry. I did, of course, learn some in elementary school, but same with languages, if you don't use it, you lose it, and I have lost it. And then at the end of the study, I'm hoping to write one poem for myself and one poem for my character, and send both of those to Shay to be read. For my resources, Shay actually has a textbook, so she sent me some of the first few pages that are just basically like, what is a sonnet, what is imagery, things like that I can review. And then I also found a couple YouTube videos, which I will link down below, that I watched that are actually really interesting about how to read poetry. And then a couple blog posts that I found floating on the internet while I was trying to Google how do you write poetry. All of that will be linked below. I have already started taking some notes on the types of poetry. Just from the basic types that I've gone through, I can tell that I'm more of like a free verse or narrative poetry kind of person, but I'm down to try anything and read anything. I think is one of those things that not everybody enjoys, but most people can find some enjoyment in, but for some reason we just don't engage with the content. Not everybody loves poetry, but like most people like music, and music is just poetry to a tune. So it's interesting. We are going to start with the research. So I'm going to finish going through the textbook pages and then go from there. See you in a bit. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. I'm here for a little update. I have officially finished all of my planned research for this poetry study. I ended up going through all of the pages that Shay sent me from her textbook. There was a lot of like basic stuff that was really good to review because it's stuff that you can use outside of poetry too, like understanding imagery and the flow of words and things like that that I can use in writing as well. I also watched a few YouTube videos. So I watched a video by Anna New. It's called 10 Poetry Tips to Write Better Poems, My Poetry Secrets for Beginners / How to Start Writing Poetry. I definitely want to try, when I get to writing my own stuff, to write it by hand, because Anna highly recommends writing by hand. And I find just in general, when I'm stuck, I always go to handwriting for my novels, so it would be fun to, I think, just handwrite all of the poems that I try and write, and then I can transfer them over maybe during the edit or something like that. I also watched How to Read and Even Enjoy Poetry, and that video is by Writing with Andrew. It was an interesting way to look at poetry because it didn't seem to match with the textbook. The textbook was more, this is how to look at poetry with an academic mindset, while this Writing with Andrew video was more like, this is how you look at poetry as somebody who wants to enjoy poetry and doesn't necessarily know everything about writing poetry or things like that. So I found it really enjoyable. Most of the content on Writing with Andrew is poetry related, which I think is really awesome. So definitely check them out as well. So those are my YouTube resources, and then I had my textbook resources. I did find a couple little articles that I went through, but I'll link those in the description, so make sure you check that out, and any other relevant links will be down there as well. Now that I have gone through the research part, I think it's time to just get reading. I have already started Your Heart is the Sea by Nikita Gill. I started that a couple days ago actually, and I've just been slowly making my way through. But I do have a list of poets that I want to get to and read a couple things of. I'm gonna see what is available and then maybe decide how much of each person I read and go from there, because I don't want to be like, oh, I'm gonna read 5 poems and then I can't find anything or something like that. So for sure gonna finish the Nikita Gill book though, and then we'll go from there. See ya.
And they get dismantled, and the metal is used to make other types of weapons that will later be utilized by their military.
I have just finished all of the poetry reading that I'm gonna do for this study. I read a little over 50 poems. Not everything was a hit. Not everything ages well. But for the most part, I enjoyed what I read, and I enjoyed the variety of everything that I read. I don't think that there was anything really that felt like any other person that I had read. And I feel like that's really fun because they're kind of poets grouped in ages, and even within a certain time period, like the older poets versus the newer poets, they all had a unique voice, and I really like that. So for the most part, I was reading 5 poems per person just to get like a idea of the person's work before I moved on to the next one. So I thought I would very quickly just let you know my favorites. I made a list of all of the poems that I read, and then for all except for one, I think, I picked a favorite poem that I had read. Yes, I think there's just one poet. I couldn't pick a favorite because I didn't love anything that they had written. That does not mean that they have nothing good written. It just means that I did not find in my 5 poems something that I enjoyed. So just a disclaimer. I would also like to shout out the Poetry Foundation website, because a lot of these poems were available like totally free on the Poetry Foundation, and some of them even had recordings of the poet reading the poem, which I think is really awesome because then you know exactly how it's supposed to sound. So anyways, the first poem is Dreams by Langston Hughes. The second poem is Sick by Shel Silverstein. That's one of Shay's favorites by that poet. The next is Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. For Elizabeth Acevedo, I cheated a little bit because I actually had 2 that I really liked. Self-Portrait as Lilith and Iron by Elizabeth Acevedo were very good. And then a very close second/third, if those 2 were a tie, is You Mean You Don't Weep at the Nail Salon. I really like that one too. For Rudy Francisco, I will link a couple of his performances in the description down below, because Rudy is an excellent spoken word poet who I knew about prior to this study. So good. But the favorite that I picked of what I watched for him is A Few Things. That's what the poem is called. For Rupi Kaur, Rupi doesn't really name her poems, so I'm just going to read you the one that I liked out of the ones that I read. It says, "What is the greatest lesson a woman should learn? That since day one, she already had everything she needed within herself. It's the world that convinced her she did not." I like it. Next, by Gwendolyn Brooks, is A Light and Diplomatic Bird. This was one of the ones where like I liked it, but wasn't really like a super fan of what I had of the 5 that I read. That was just one that I liked. By Nikki Giovanni. This is one that had a recording of the poet reading the poem. Her Dreams #2, Runner Up. is the poem that I liked. By Anne Sexton, I really liked Her Kind. I thought it was like very good because I was a little bit concerned for the other 4 that I read, but the 5th one came through and I was like, that's the one. And then the final poet that I read was Charles Bukowski, and I did not pick a favorite for him just because I didn't really vibe with anything that I had read, and that's fine. Not everything is meant for everybody. So that is it for the reading. Now it's time to write. So as I kind of expected, I vibe more with the more narrative / free verse poetry style. So I think that's what I'm going to try for myself. I'm going to start with some brainstorming. I'm going to try what Anna New suggested and write in my notebook. So I'll do my brainstorming in the notebook and then I will go from there and see what / if I can write anything and how it flows. Let's do this. Updates. So I brainstormed yesterday and actually it did not too badly. I first kind of started with just some ideas that I had in my head, and then I kind of moved to Pinterest, and I have a pin board of story inspo. So I kind of just scrolled through there and jotted down some ideas based on like thoughts I had on the images or like what story I think would attach to that image. So I ended up with 13 potential poems / image ideas, and I was pretty happy with that. Then I ended up writing 4 poems yesterday, which is a lot more than I thought I would. The first one was a little bit rocky. I like it. I was telling Shay, I feel like I like the name more than I like the poem, which is fine. I can work on it. But the second one that I wrote is kind of a poem for my sisters, and I really like that one, and I read it to Shay and Shay also likes it, so that was nice. And then I wrote one that's a little bit more fantasy-ish, I guess I could say. It's about like the sea being a siren. And then I wrote one about sunburns and first love kind of thing, and that was great. And then today I wrote one more so far. I wrote it at the park. I was gonna actually update there, but the park was like very busy for a weekday in the middle of the week. I was very surprised. I wrote another poem about hair, like our hair, and I wrote the title of another poem that I have not started, The Forest Fireflies, and then in brackets it says, Are Watching Me. So I'm gonna write that one now and then practice editing 1 or 2 of these because I really don't know where to start. That will be another clip for later when I'm struggling. I'm gonna write the next one and then I will check back in. So for this experiment, I ended up writing 6 poems, of which I sent 5 to Shay. The one that I didn't send was actually the first one that I wrote, and it needs the most work, and I just wasn't really vibing with it, so I didn't bother to send it. But the other 5 I did send. For editing, it was really interesting to me because editing these poems was less extensive than I thought it was going to be. For the most part, what I was working on was how to make the formatting look the way I wanted the poem to be read. I did definitely change some words. I did get rid of a few words, but for the most part, it was reading the poems aloud and finding where I needed the breaks and pauses to be, and that was mostly it. I didn't actually change much of the content once it was written, which is something that Anna New mentioned in their video, that once they write their poems, for the most part, they don't change. It's just like little syntax, like little things that you can fiddle with, but for the most part, the content of the poem stays because you're kind of following your train of thought to completion, and that's the poem. So it was not as extensive as I thought. In my notebook, I did my edits, and then I also did like another mini edit when I transferred them onto my computer. It was also fun to play with the formatting. For example, that was rude. Anyways, for example, my light died, but we're back. For example, my first poem that I sent Shay is on the longer side, so I made it into 2 columns, and I think it looks really pretty. Like very aesthetic poetry. And I was able to play with shorter sentences, longer sentences, the way it kind of makes the page look. And yeah, overall it was really fun. I like writing poetry more than I thought. There's so much variety with poetry that I'm very glad that I got a chance to experience. I'm super happy that I got to read poems from all of these awesome poets. Whether they were my style or not, I feel like I took something away from each one that I read. I also really appreciate the people in my live streams who were giving me suggestions on poets and specific poems. I had a lot of fun going through everything. It's definitely nerve-wracking to write poetry, I feel like, because while writing, novel writing, you're vulnerable. It feels like it's on another level when you're writing poetry. It feels to me like journaling to a rhythm. Does that make sense? Not everything that I wrote was a personal experience. Like some of it was just fun, fantasy-ish. But some of them, like my first poem that I sent Shay was like about my sisters, and it's like journaling. That's what it felt like as I was writing it. Journaling, but like on a very small scale, like minimal words, trying to get your point across as fast as possible with as few words as possible. That's what it felt like. I don't think that I write ever with rhythm in mind, but I feel like with poetry, while you're writing, you're a lot more conscious of how things sound and how things will be read aloud. It's writing in a way that I don't usually do, and I just think it feels like journaling, and I really like that. So I feel like I'm going to continue. I don't think that I will ever be a poet, but that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy poetry and all of the things that come with it. Thank you everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. Please, please, please go check out Shay's video. It will be linked in the description along with anything else that I have mentioned in this probably very long video, and subscribe to both of us. I'm really happy that we did this experiment together. It's probably something that I wouldn't have done because Shay is a poet and I am not. So without her, I probably wouldn't have done this experiment. So I really appreciate her, and I appreciate you all for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment your favorite poet below if you have one, and if you don't have one, let me know what your thoughts are on poetry overall. And with that, I will see you somewhere on the internet. Bye.
There is no woman in the sea, eyes green as sun-bloomed algae, hair twisting tendrils of wave and coral. The song you hear is the sea herself, singing fury, singing wrath, extending her reach to the air, whistling around your ears. She is only calm on her furthest shores, where some lay on pale sand beaches, drinking up the sun and distant whispers of her song. But her voice is loudest in the deep, waves battering hulls, land too far to be seen, her hold on you absolute. That is where the sweetness comes, in the panic, in the frenzy, in the isolation. Because the dark below the waves is always calm, and in her arms a cold, quiet sleep is promised.